Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome everyone to Building LGBTQ plus Inclusivity into Your Practice. My name is Dr. Stuart Butler. I'm Regional Director of Behavioral Health and Addiction Medicine for Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, and a newly minted NAMI California board member. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Katie Pettersen, who's a lead school psychologist in Rethinking Inclusion. She's a nationally certified school psychologist and urgent advocate of student needs who has worked with KIPP Public Schools, Northern California for the past 7 years. Katie's areas of interest include mental health awareness, autism spectrum disorders, and supporting LGBTQ plus youth. Katie serves as past president of the Santa Clara County Association of School Psychologists, chair of the CASP Charter and Alternative Learning Committee, and adjunct professor in the Counseling and School of Psychology program at Brandman University. I'm going to say that right. Counseling and School Psychology program at Brandman University. Then we have Amanda Cruz, who's a student support coordinator and also part of Rethinking Inclusion. Amanda is a passionate educator with over 8 years of serving students and families in education. Her experience in special education, teacher development and coaching, restorative justice practices, diversity and equity training, and data analysis support her work in developing lasting school structures and systems. In service of creating more equitable schools, Amanda strives to create schools that provide opportunity and access for students and staff, and too often find themselves on the margins. Today, Katie and Amanda will discuss how critical it is to support lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ youth to improve student outcomes. Thank you both, and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Stuart. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get into the slide deck. Amanda has linked in the Zoom chat the link to the Hoova app where you can download the presentation materials. And we'd love to invite you to engage in the chat with us as we go through this presentation. So as was mentioned, this is Building LGBTQ plus Inclusivity into Your Practice. We are your hosts for today. My name is Katie Pettersen and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Sorry, and my name is Amanda Cruz. My pronouns are also she, her, and hers.
And you may notice that we are introducing ourselves as hosts for this session, and that's because we don't consider ourselves to be experts. We are presenting information and resources that we have found helpful in our work, guiding us toward this mission of inclusivity. And we hope to share these resources with you in your quest to support LGBTQ plus students and staff that you might work with at your schools and your organizations. To start, we wanted to ground into our collective why, what brought us to this work and led us to building this practice for ourselves. And these are some pictures of some students that I work with at KIPP. Amanda and I co-founded the GSA Club, the Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club at our middle schools 5 years ago. And we co-facilitated the club for a number of years until Amanda moved on, but she made a lasting impression on our students, and it's a great opportunity for us to be able to teach our students. We have guest speakers. You might be familiar with Gavin Grimm. He has come and spoken to our club twice, and we do activities, and it's a lot of learning for our middle schoolers, and just seeing the impact of that opportunity has had for our students is, you know, the reason that we're in this work is to help support our students with their learning and understanding of this topic.
In addition to the students that we serve each and every day, we see them, whether, you know, the last year and a half through Zoom, in person now, Katie and I also ground ourselves in the research. We know that numbers are things we have the ability to change, and the numbers facing LGBTQ identified youth right now and LGBTQ identified staff drive us in this work. So we'll read these statistics to you in hopes that they too will drive you in your work as well. According to a Gallup study in 2020, 1 in 6 adult members of the Gen Z population, those 18 to 23, consider themselves to be LGBTQ identified. So growing population, right? And higher needs mean growing population means higher needs need to be served. 50% of Gen Z people, 56% of millennials agree that traditional gender roles and binary gender labels are outdated and no longer serve them. Less than half of LGBTQ respondents are out to an adult at school, with youth less likely to disclose their gender identity than their sexual orientation. This is based off a Trevor Project study that was released in the last year. And this last statistic I know really resonates with me and is a constant reminder to stick with the work, even when it's tough. 2 in 3 LGBTQ youth reported that someone has tried to convince them to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. With consideration, youth who'd previously undergone conversion therapy are more than twice as likely to attempt suicide as those who did not. Also from that Trevor Project study. This is just a snapshot, again, of the data, the trends that we know are facing this demographic, facing our community, and are a constant reminder to ground ourselves in why we choose this work, why this work has chosen us, why we encourage others to dedicate themselves and ground themselves in being active, being engaged, and being persistent in this work, even when it's really tough.
And just to add, as a fellow mental health provider, I'm sure you're all aware of the impact that their varying identities have on mental health and the exponential increase in mental health needs and mental illness that is facing the LGBTQ plus community. So that's why we wanted to bring this to you today. So hopefully by the end of our session, participants will be able to identify relevant terms and the importance of gender pronouns, explore biases and privilege and working with LGBTQ plus youth, familiarize ourselves with tools districts or organizations could implement, how to implement inclusive and equitable practices. So whether you are in a school district or in an organization, and then plan relevant next steps. So we want you to walk away with some action items that you can use at your organization tomorrow or starting on Monday.
Additionally, if you see this rainbow folder located on any of the slides that we're going to go through today, it's because all of the resources we're going to go over today can be found in this bit.ly link, which I'll also drop to you in the chat. This resource library has been compiled by both Katie and I and a number of our colleagues over the last 5-10 years. It is dense, it is robust, and it can be very, 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 very helpful. So if there's something today that we reference that you're like, oh, I didn't write down where it comes from, don't worry, I promise it's in the bit.ly. It'll also be referenced by link on the interactive handout, which if you haven't downloaded yet from the Hoova link, please be sure to do so because it will guide your thinking as we jump into this first activity.
Awesome. So we're going to just start with a brief reintroduction to terminology and gender pronouns. Hopefully this is not new for you, so we're just going to give you a little bit of time to refamiliarize yourself. So if you do have your interactive handout, this is page 2 of the handout. You can go into the glossary and look through and read through the different terms on this glossary. This is not a comprehensive glossary, but probably some of the terms that are most common that you might come across in your work. And you'll have 2 minutes to just read through the glossary and reflect on what terms are you already familiar with and what terms are new for you or different, defined differently than you previously thought. And I'm going to start the timer. It might be a little loud, so feel free to turn your volume down with the timer music, and then we will re-engage in about 2 minutes. hopefully that calming music didn't put you to sleep, because if y'all ate your lunch recently, I know it's a little bit after lunch for me in California. We should have used some more pump up music. So we'd love for you to go into the Hoova Chat and type some terms that you might be familiar with, terms that you want to explore more closely, or some terms that you just have questions about. Feel free to post those in the chat as we go through. And also these handouts and resources are meant to be shared with your colleagues, shared with your organization. We'd love to just, make sure that we are spreading the knowledge, spreading the wealth of resources to others who might find it useful. One other tool I wanted to highlight before we get into more of the meat of this presentation is the Gender Unicorn. Y'all are probably familiar with the Gender Unicorn. This is a really great teaching tool for people of all ages. And you can go to transstudent.org/gender to find the Gender Unicorn in many different languages. And there is an interactive one on the website as well. We have also included a blank printable version in our bit.ly link, but it is available online for ease of access. All right, so we're going to shift to talking a little bit about gender pronouns. This Trevor project from 2019 research shows that trans and non-binary youth whose pronouns were honored by people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those whose pronouns were not respected. So something seemingly simple as affirming a person by using the pronouns that they have chosen for themselves has such an impact on the people that we work with. What are gender pronouns? Gender pronouns are how we are referring to one another in the third person. You might have noticed that we both introduced ourselves with our pronouns, and it is important that we are asking people what their pronouns are rather than guessing what their pronouns are. One thing I want to highlight is years ago, it was preferred gender pronouns, PGPs. You might have heard that term, preferred pronouns. But the language is shifting, and we are removing the word preferred from the pronouns because preference makes it seem like it's an option for us to use another person's gender pronouns, and it's not an option. It's something that we must do in order to affirm another person's identity. So it's no longer preferred, it is an expectation, and allowing one another to offer up our pronouns when we're introducing each other, inviting others to share their pronouns is a way that we can reduce the likelihood of misgendering somebody or making assumptions. This art is a really, really great art that reflects, that one person's gender identity or gender expression may not match the pronouns that we think of when we look at them. So there's a wide range of pronouns, and it's important to affirm people by respecting their pronouns, no matter what their expression or how they present on the cover, or what their presentation conveys to you. I really just think this is a pretty artwork too. So now I would love to give you an opportunity to practice your pronouns. The more that you practice introducing yourself with your pronouns, the more easy it'll come to you. And at some point it'll just be like, wow, when did I ever say my name without saying my pronouns too when I was introducing myself? So in the chat, we'd love for you to go into the Hoova Chat and just type in your name and your pronouns. What is your role in organization? And maybe, thinking back to the glossary, share one term that you wish more people in your field understood, or a term that you're still learning about. And as people start putting in their information, thank you, Mina, she, her. Other people can share in the chat, and we can move into exploring privilege. So just to ground in, the language that we use matters, whether we, see it or not. The more that we are intentional about using our, people's pronouns and affirming people's identities, as well as thinking about the language that we use in conversation with others, using gender neutral language as much as you can will create a more welcoming environment for all. I think the big thing to take away from this is, how often do you say, hey guys, when you're talking to just a whole group of people? That's a big one. I think if you can shift from saying hello, hey guys, to folks, or hey y'all, hey everybody. Another one that we hear is ladies and gents, ladies and gentlemen. There are more people than just ladies and gents. And so moving away from the binary, moving toward gender neutral language is going to help everybody feel accepted and welcome.
What I've been working on including most recently, in particular when writing like policies or procedures, is removing the language. It feels outdated now that I'm saying it, but I know I catch it a lot when I look at policies. Anytime I see the phrase like he/she will be able to, right? That phrase, that statement at the beginning implies immediately that only people who use he as a pronoun or she as a pronoun apply here, right? And in reality, it doesn't matter what your pronouns are, everybody's doing it, right? And so if what we're looking for is all folks will be able to, then what we're saying is all folks will be able to, and we're going to speak with precision because that's what we're going for.
Yep.
And so if you have job descriptions, or again, like school policies or a rule book or a poster, and you just notice that those pronouns, like I'm working really hard to just be like, ew, get that out of here. That's not what I'm going for. How do I get that out of here?
Yep. All right, we're going to move into the privilege activity.
Awesome. And as you do that, I had someone jump in, shout out to Sophia, the bit.ly link, I think we moved the folder, and so it needs a request access, Katie. So while I do the next activity, if you have the bandwidth.
Yep, I will do that.
Thank you. You are incredible. All right, I'm going to lead us through our next activity. Thank you to those of you who introduced yourself in the chat. It is wonderful to connect with you. I'm going to ground us in a quick quote. For this next activity, we're going to be discussing privilege. And so shout out to Bell Hooks here. Privilege is not in and of itself bad. What matters is what we do with privilege. We have to share our resources and take direction about how to use our privilege in ways that empower those who lack it. So we use that as a reminder as we explore the unpacking of our privilege. There's a lot of power in examining and understanding and addressing the privileges that our identities grant us. And so we're going to take a few minutes together today to check our privileges and explore them individually before we discuss them through the chat collectively. So in a moment, but not yet, we are going to go through an activity where, for the sake of the activity, the following privileges on page 2 and 3 of the handout have been removed from everyone. So no one has access to these privileges for the sake of this activity. And in order to regain those privileges, you must buy them back. Okay. So for the sake of your budget, according to your first name, you can see in this green rectangle how much money you have to spend. If each privilege is $100, my name is Amanda, I have $500 to spend, so I can buy 5 privileges, right? So you'll have a few minutes to yourself to read through the privileges listed on page 2 and 3, and those are separated by sexuality and by gender privileges, I believe. I'm sorry, I don't have that up in front of me. Let me triple check. So the page 2, you're going to see a cisgender privilege list, and on page 3, you're going to see the heterosexual privilege list, right? So based on your first name, you'll read through those, and then you'll start making some decisions around what you'd like to buy back. And then we'll do some reflection about how that activity felt for you, what you took away from it, and what you gleaned from that experience. Okay, I'll ask Katie to start the timer, remembering that the music might be a little loud. If you want to turn your volume down, you'll have about 3 minutes to read through these, and the music will be a little more jazzy.
I was gonna say, this music's a little more club time, so do it.
About 30 seconds left. Awesome, bringing it back. We'd love to hear from you about what that experience felt like for you. Sometimes there are privileges on this list that people are deeply familiar with and intimate with and have experience with, and sometimes there are privileges on this list that other folks have never considered. And so if there were surprises for you or insights that you feel prepared to share, we'd love to engage with you in the chat. If there were frustrations that came up for you or thoughts that you feel prepared to put down, we would love to engage with you. We'll spend about 30 seconds here. Nice to meet you, Martin. Thank you for introducing yourself. And while folks are using think time, I know when Katie and I last led this presentation, one of the insights that folks shared were around the idea of choosing privileges and having to prioritize safety, right, over comfort. So the idea of being able to share about your weekend versus feeling safe going into a restroom and wanting to choose one, but then wanting to prioritize physical safety, and just feeling like you had to negotiate that, not feeling like something folks were familiar with or comfortable with or prepared for. Yeah, Morgan, just feeling like things can be taken for granted. We'll keep an eye on the chat. Oh, go ahead, Katie, sorry.
I was gonna say, absolutely. It's so easy to take for granted if those privileges are things that we don't even have to think about. And that's the purpose of this activity, is just to, you know, give you another perspective so that you can put yourself in another person's shoes. These tools are really great tools to also bring to your organization and engage in this activity with your colleagues and see, you know, if it sparks anything new for them as well.
That's exactly where I was going. The reality is, if there are privileges on this list that you had never considered or that you have taken for granted, accept the truth that there's likely someone who experienced the lack of this privilege today on your site, yesterday, last month, expressed a frustration, expressed it, or faced a barrier, left because they faced a challenge they couldn't work through, right? Or struggled and faced barriers at multiple sites because they couldn't get through it multiple times, or gave up, right? These barriers exist, and our job is to figure out how do we create a more equitable experience so that they don't bar people and limit people from accessing the services that they need, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Janet mentioned thoughts about intersectionality. That's so true. The intersection between gender identity and the privilege of various gender identities and sexual orientations versus race and ethnicity, or documentation status, or ability versus disability. It's, you know, that those things
very quickly
add up. We are going to hope that you take away we're going to get into two main tools, and hopefully you take away something from these tools that you can use either within your organization, so when you're working with your colleagues, or when you're working one-on-one with either youth or adults, depending on who you serve. So the first one that I'm going to review is a tool that will hopefully empower your organizations and staff. Starting with thinking about the different the different things that your organization may or may not be ready to do. I want to share, this is a district and school facing assessment form. There is an organizational tool that is similar that we can also drop into the chat. But when you look through this, I think it can easily be applied to organizations if you're in a community-based organization, or if you work with some sort of like Department of Children's Services or things like that. The different tool areas on this assessment can easily be applied to other organizations besides just district and schools. But I really like this tool. It was developed by, I'm biased because it was developed by a school psychologist, but in conjunction with a parent of a transgender child and a mental health worker. And so I'm going to just break down some parts of this. If you want to look deeper while I'm going through this, there it is in the bit.ly link. And I just wanted to also voice over with the bit.ly link, it is case sensitive. So you have to type it in with the capital LGBTQ. And then you will need to log in to a Google account in order to access the Google Drive folder. But anyone with any Gmail account should be able to access it. So this tool is a way to sit down with people in your organization and say, all right, what are we doing well? What do we need to improve on? It's broken down into policies, communication and messaging, curriculum, instruction and educational materials. So what are the different educational materials that my organization is presenting to our families? Is it gendered? Is it based on something that, you know, doesn't necessarily apply or doesn't necessarily jive with people who identify as LGBTQ? For instance, the conversion therapy stuff, you know, that could be one area. Your organization might still have tools or have, you know, resources in a folder that parents can access or that families can access that talks about conversion therapy. That's one way to look and see, you know, what is being presented, what materials are being presented to families and people within your organization. School folks that are working in schools specifically, there are different ways that you could be considering the way that your school or your organization handles behavior and handles conduct. And thinking about anti-bullying policies and programs that are inclusive. Health and wellness, I'm sure this applies to a lot of your organizations. So if your organization covers some sort of health and wellness programming, is it LGBTQ friendly? Is there sex ed programming that does include, you know, LGBTQ plus friendly programming? And I will highlight for those of you who do have an organization that does that work, there's an organization called Gender Spectrum that has a really great puberty education, sex education curriculum. So that could be something to consider within your org if that's covered under an umbrella in your organization. Facilities. So when you're thinking about where am I inviting people from my community into a space that has gender neutral bathrooms? Is there a space that is welcoming? When you're thinking about safe spaces or safe zones, do we have anything present within our organization that flags to somebody, I am somebody that is knowledgeable in this area and you should feel safe, or hopefully can feel safer when you are in this place. So thinking about that as well, when you're thinking about your organization, your clinic, your hospital, or school, wherever you work. So this is just an offering of a resource that you can utilize, go through and see if what's applicable, have that conversation with your supervisor, have that conversation with the director of your program and see how we can improve in our inclusivity as it relates to the policies, the procedures, the materials that we are presenting to our community and to our clients. And on that note, I also wanted to share, we wanted to share a model policy for supporting transgender and gender nonconforming or non-binary people. These are school-based policies that are being shown on the slide, but I think just considering what sort of policies and procedures does your organization have? I'm sure your organization is mandated by state law, has something related to how you're not going to discriminate based on race or ethnicity, and maybe even sexual orientation, but does it include gender identity? And often it does not, depending on your state. It may or may not include gender identity specific stuff. And I think that's very important when we're thinking specifically about supporting people who identify as transgender or gender non-binary. The model policy, if you work in schools, the model policy is also in the bit.ly link, so you can access that and check it out and see if this is a tool that you can take to somebody in your organization to start that conversation. Because all it takes is one person to ask a question and maybe get a ball rolling. What I would like to provide now before we move into the youth facing or client facing tools is giving you a little bit of time to use the handout. So if you go to page 4 of your handout, there are boxes that will allow you to create action steps. Do you want to look further at these tools? Do you want to take this tool to your organization and talk to your supervisor about it? What are some ways that you can use the self-assessment or create a model policy within your organization? Let's see, 45. Yeah, I'm going to start this 3-minute timer so that you can take the time to reflect on ways that you can engage with these tools in your organization. About 30 more seconds to wrap up your reflections. All right, thank you for engaging in those varying tools and resources that you can use from an organizational perspective. As we move forward, I'd love if you are willing to share in the Hoova Chat, which tool or resource are you most excited to implement? Who can you leverage as a thought partner with these tools, and what obstacles do you foresee? And we're going to move into our second tool to empower youth and families, and I'll pass it to Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Katie. The tools that we're going to cover in this next section are designed to support the youth and families that we serve. The first tool that we're going to review together is brought to you by GLSEN. All of these can be found in the bit.ly link I saw. I think Morgan posted a question asking about it. We're still working on getting that link fixed, so I apologize. It will be available within the next few minutes, hopefully, if not by the end of the day. But GLSEN shares these and updates these as downloadables, printables that you can share and post in your space, post in your office, post on your bulletin boards. There's more on the next slide. And I think what I like most about them is that they show different types of people, right? It shows that it doesn't really matter what you look like, that all folks can be impacted by the data that they put on these stickers, and can get support if they are being impacted, and are deserving of love and safety and protection at all times, even if they are experiencing impact or harm in some way. And so finding these on the bit.ly or going directly to GLSEN to see if they have new downloadables or printables that you can access is one way to ramp up your space, make it more visibly inclusive from a distance, right? Another way to empower the youth and families that you serve would be to start a GSA. Historically, a GSA was referred to as a gay straight alliance. It's evolved over time. And so when Katie and I started a GSA, we named it the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And really that's just our way of being more inclusive. And so we asked ourselves a couple of key questions and found as many resources as we could, uploading the library and the resources that we put into the bit.ly. Is there a GSA club already out there? Can we connect with the advisor that exists? If not, can you become that advisor? Can you leverage someone else so that you're not in it alone? I know I was that person for Katie, and it was totally worth it. So when one of us needed to tag out, the other one had the other person's back. When one of us was underprepared that week, the other person was already prepared. And we just had different connections with different kids, right? So when Katie knew someone, I didn't know them and they would come. And when I knew someone, Katie might not have met that kid yet. And so it just broadened our network and our reach. Definitely reach out to administrators and determine how that opportunity can fit within this space. And then the recommendation I would make just based off of our experience is develop your bio, your mission, and your time to meet with youth. Maybe not your time and place to meet, but the mission and who you want to be as an org and as a club is definitely something worth putting in front of the youth and families that you're connected to agree to who we want to be and how we want to be that. And then advertise, get kids there. And one of the most fruitful sessions we had was about preparing youth, equipping youth around how to talk to others about why we come to this space, right? How do we talk to our friends about it when they have questions about why we're here? How do we answer questions from our family when they ask, oh, why do you go to that club after school, right? And for every kid, it's a different answer, but based on what the environment is like with their friends or with their family or with whomever is asking. And so just making sure that that student or that youth that you're working with feels prepared to answer the question, no matter who's asking, in a way that makes them feel comfortable and confident and at ease. All these resources on the left can be found at these links as well if you want to go to the source instead of our bit.ly library. And now I'm going to go deeper into one tool specifically. Katie and I strongly encourage you all to leverage the gender support plan that comes from the Gender Spectrum Organization in supporting students who are in transition or students whose gender presentation is clearly impacting or playing a role in their ability to access the space, right? So whether that's supporting the youth or the family in weighing their possible options if they are exploring transition, whether that's maintaining the youth's privacy, right? Maybe they are out to you in a certain extent, or out to one friend, but not out to all their friends, out to one other person at your site, but not out to all the people at your site. Being prepared with contingency plans. If you're exploring how to do this, the gender support plan is really comprehensive and allows you to think through all these what ifs in really specific ways that I think we all know to think about, but once you're talking to a young person about that, it pushes them to go, oh yeah, I do want you to know, but I don't want them to know. And I do want you to use this pronoun with me, but I want them to use this other pronoun with me. And if my mom ever asks you questions, this is what I want you to say. But if my brother asks you questions, this is what I want you to say. And like equipping them to have all of that knowledge and then be able to advocate with you and be clear with you means that when mistakes come up, because they're going to come up because it's an imperfect world and it stinks, everyone's prepared. And then when it does happen and you go to kid and you're like, brother came, somebody said something unintentionally, this was what happened, kid goes, oh, I knew exactly how to prepare myself for this situation. Remember when we talked about this? Like, it stinks, but we talked about it. So we're going to explore this just a little more closely. On the next slide, the first part of the tool has you explore the power of team. So it has you explore this young person's parents, caregivers, school leaders, counselors, teachers, clinicians, any outside org support. So if there are pastors or mentors or any person in this young person's sphere that counts or qualifies, right, as part of this person's team, they make it into part of the plan. And then it helps you to explore, what does trust and communication look like? Just like I said, it allows you to be prepared to give grace and discuss mistakes so that when mistakes happen, like I said, don't want them to happen, but they are potentially going to happen. You want to be prepared for them to happen. You've proactively anticipated those possible scenarios, right? And then once those mistakes do happen, you've now prepared so well for them that you get to go back to that person who made the mistake and say, hey, remember when you and I discussed X, Y, and Z, and then you made this mistake in front of brother or whomever was there? Here's the impact that had on person or young person or on mom or on me. Here's how we have to clean that up now. And here's why that can't happen again. And the next time this happens, like with a different young person, with the same person, it means that the follow-up conversation can be a lot more transactional because you knew this was coming. We talked about this in advance before the mistake had happened. The next part of the plan allows you to discuss privacy, confidentiality, and disclosure. You prioritize the maintenance and flexibility of this document. You meet with young person, you come up with this doc, you figure out who you want to know, what information, and then you leave it. And it goes in a drawer, it lives on your drive, but that's actually not how it works, because next month, 3 months from now, you're gonna get a text from kid and kid's gonna say, guess what I did today? I came out to everyone in my whole family, right? And now the whole doc has to be updated. Or I did this other, like lots of things change all of the time. This document has to be a living and breathing document that needs to be updated and flexible based on that kid's needs, essentially, right? So we will be navigating varied levels of privacy and terrain, and that is perfectly okay and to be expected. As long as you have a routine with kiddo that says, how often are we going to come back to this? Or, hey, if any of this changes, will you let me know? Like if I swing by and say like, hey, how are things going? Like, is this still feeling right for you? That's the best way to keep this document up to date and feeling current and feeling aligned to the present moment. This last slide is just a reminder that the end of the document really encourages you to get granular and be open about ambiguity. So yes, get granular. What is the safety protocol when you are in class, when you are in between classes, when you are at lunch on the quad, when you are walking home, but walking home past your friend's house, like what is the safety protocol for all of these plans? And then what happens when granularity isn't available? We got to be open to ambiguity, right? The more specific we can be upfront, the more primed we'll be for when ambiguity hits the fan, and we have to be open to it. Okay. The purpose of the plan is really to go as deep as we can and cover as far a breadth as we can, with as much reasonable expectations as possible. So yeah, I know we're cutting it close on time, so I'm actually going to scoot us into the reflection stage. In this section of the presentation, you had the opportunity to explore the GSA club and the thinking behind starting a GSA at your site, and to more intimately, I think, than Katie and I have ever presented before, dig into the gender support plan. And so if you turn to page 5 of your handout, there's some space there to think about who you want to leverage at your site to help you dig into one of these tools, which tool you'd want to dig into. And we'll give you some time to do that now.
About 10 more seconds to wrap up.
All right. So you had a moment to think through who at your site would be best to leverage as a thought partner, what obstacles you might face right away, how you could work through them so you can anticipate them in advance, and what additional questions you might have so that we can answer them before we close out. As we get to that Q&A, we're going to wrap up with you really quickly here. Today, as a participant, you were able to identify relevant terms and develop a deeper understanding of the importance of gender pronouns, explore biases and privilege in working with LGBTQ folks and youth, familiarize yourself with the tools that districts organizations could implement to be more inclusive and equitable in their practice, and plan relevant next steps for your individual site. On page 6 of your handout, there's lots of places for you, or there's lots of space for you to reflect and really codify your next steps. We have about 4 minutes. We really do want to open the floor up for questions and thoughts and think time. And so we'll leave you with our personal emails. We are always available to you to reach out, to be thought partners to you, to support you in your work at your organization, to lead trainings like this, develop trainings for you at your site if that is helpful to you, individualize them if needed. So please reach out if that is something you are interested in. And we are happy to engage with you in the chat if you have questions. We've seen a couple come in around the resources. Thank you, Katie, for dropping that direct Google Drive folder link. Just going to type a big thank you in the chat.
We have about 3 more minutes. If Sophia, I don't know if it's feasible to unmute folks, but if people want to come off of mute and are able to ask any questions that exist. Also, if there's a specific resource or tool that you are looking for that can help your work, we'd love to know. We can try and share things that we know exist. This was just scratching the surface of what is out there to support your work. Janet asked, I work with families outside of support groups. What other tools are helpful to parents for supporting youth? That's a great question. You're asking outside of support groups for families? I'm sure that you are familiar, your state or your county might have a P flag, parents and families of lesbians and gay students or youth. And so there may be a P flag chapter that your families can access that might have other events aside from support groups. That's one thing that comes to mind with regard to supporting families. Amanda, what about you?
There's quite a few resources in the bit.ly folder that we've pulled from over the years that I would comb through that to find some resources. I know we found a few resources that are also in English and in Spanish designed for parents and families and caregivers. So that might be of service to you. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. There is an organization here in San Francisco called the Family Acceptance Project out of UCSF. And they've been doing a lot of research to support family acceptance. So if you work with families who are have youth who are coming out or anything like that, and you need support with acceptance, there's a lot of great tools there. The Family Acceptance Project. And similarly, in the East Bay of California, there's an organization that's specifically for Latinx identifying or Spanish speaking families called Somos Familia. So I will drop those in the chat as well as great resources for families. Oh yeah, perfect.
It's along the same vein.
And we've come, I'm going to have to stop you all. I think we could probably go on for another half hour. You guys were so terrific. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us today. Katie and Amanda, We're wonderful for this wonderful discussion. For any questions on the content, please feel free to email presenter. For any questions or concerns for today's events, please feel free to email nami.california@namica.org. You are welcome to leave the session to move on to the next part of your agenda.